The day I discovered my grandfather's secret, he forever lost what he valued most. That antique mirror didn't just reflect my body, it reflected his sick desire. When it was over, the ambulance took away only an empty shell of the man who once made me tremble. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my dear viewers. How wonderful it is to chat with you today. I'm Eleanor Miller, 72 years old, and living in Greenfield, Massachusetts, a town that welcomed me after life's many twists and turns. I was born in Charleston, South Carolina, but life brought me here almost 30 years ago, and I've made my peaceful corner here. These days, my greatest joy is tending to my herb garden. I grow basil, rosemary, mint, fennel, and so many others I can barely count them on my fingers. Each plant has a purpose, you know. Some are for seasoning food, others for making teas that cure everything from stomach aches to a heavy heart. My neighbors always come asking, "Miss Eleanor, do you have a tea for headaches?" Or, "Miss Eleanor, what would you recommend for this anxiety?" And I go out, pick the right herbs, explain how to prepare them, and see the relief on their faces afterward. This knowledge about medicinal plants began when I was just a little girl, with my grandmother Ruth, God rest her soul. She taught me the name of every plant in her yard, showed me how to harvest without harming the roots, how to dry the leaves just right. But after she passed, that knowledge stayed dormant inside me for many years. I only truly became interested again when I was in my 50s, after my children had grown wings and flown from the nest. From where I'm sitting on my porch, I can see my entire backyard. I have a wooden rocking chair that my late husband, George, made with his own hands. The floor is well-preserved wood that creaks a little when I rock. In front, I have ferns in pots that cascade down like green waterfalls. In the bed beside them, my herbs grow organized in small squares, their aroma mixed with the smell of fresh coffee that I always have in the thermos beside me is the perfume of happiness for this old lady. Oh, my dears, before I continue, I'd like to ask a small favor. If you're enjoying my storytelling, please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps bring this old lady's stories to more people. And you, my dears who are watching now, tell me in the comments, from which town are you watching? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with coffee, after lunch, or already in the evening? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take time out of your day to listen to Grandma's stories here. Tell me, okay? Let's create a chain of caring. Today I'm going to tell you a difficult story, one I've kept in my heart for many years. It's about a mirror that reflected more than just faces. It reflected secrets, pain, and in the end, liberation. It's about how, sometimes, we need to face our own reflections to find out who we really are. This story begins many years ago, when I was still a girl with braids and dreams, and how an object as simple as a mirror can hold so many painful memories, but can also be the path to liberation. It's a story of survival, my dears. A story about how sometimes we need to take the reins of our own lives, even when everything seems too dark. Prepare your heart, because this story isn't easy, but I promise that, like every storm that passes, there's always a rainbow at the end. Let's go back in time, to when I was just a girl, with the innocence that life hadn't yet taken from me. My childhood in Charleston was like a clear sky day that gradually becomes covered by dark clouds. At first, everything was light. I was born in 1953 in a simple but love-filled house near the harbor. My father, Jeremy, worked as a stevedore, loading and unloading the ships that arrived. He was a tall man with calloused hands and an easy smile. My mother, Lenora, was a woman of delicate beauty with dark hair that fell to her waist. She used to sing while sewing clothes for the wealthier families in town. It was just my younger brother Timmy and me. He was 3 years younger. Our house was small, made of wood, painted light blue, with a dirt yard where we played, and an old mango tree that gave us shade on hot summer days. On the living room walls, some black and white portraits told the story of our family. One showed my paternal grandparents, Oliver and Ruth, on their wedding day. Grandma Ruth was a wise and gentle woman. She was born in Pennsylvania and kept many traditions from her German ancestors, especially knowledge about herbs and natural remedies. She had a special way with plants, talked to them as if they were people. "Plants are like children," she would say. "They need love, attention, and discipline to grow right." Every Sunday we would have lunch at my grandparents' house, which was on the other side of town. It was a larger, older house, with a big plot in the back where Grandma Ruth grew her herbs and vegetables. I remember the smell of sweet potato bread coming out of the wood stove, the fish stew with grits that she prepared with the sea bass Grandpa Oliver caught at the harbor. Life followed its natural course. I went to public school, played tag and hopscotch with the other kids on the street, helped Mom hang clothes on the line, learned from Grandma Ruth to recognize plants by smell and leaves. During the 4th of July, the entire town would be decorated, and we would dance at the central square with bonfires lit and colorful flags waving in the wind. During the town's Heritage Festival, which was Charleston's biggest celebration, I was enchanted by the processions, the parades, the Grand Marshal and Lady in their formal attire. But when I was 9, the first dark cloud appeared. Dad had an accident at the port. A steel cable snapped and hit several people, including him. He was bedridden for 3 months, unable to work. It was the first time I saw worry on my mother's face. Money started getting tight, and she began sewing until late at night to compensate. After Dad recovered, things were never the same again. He couldn't get the same job, started drinking more than he should. Arguments between my parents became frequent. I remember hiding under the covers with Timmy, covering his ears while we heard the shouting coming from the kitchen. It was during this time that I started spending more time at my grandparents' house. Grandma Ruth noticed when I was sad and would take me to the yard to teach me about plants. "Look at this one, Ellie," she would say, showing an herb with small leaves. "It's stonecrop. It looks weak, but it's strong enough to break kidney stones. Sometimes we need to be like this little plant, small but determined." When I turned 12, the biggest storm arrived. Mom suddenly fell ill. It started with coughs that wouldn't go away, then fever, weakness. The town doctor said it was tuberculosis, a disease that at that time was practically a death sentence for the poor. Within months, she wasted away before our eyes. Dad, who was already distant, dove deep into drinking. My mother's funeral was on a morning with a light drizzle. I remember the simple coffin, the white flowers, the pastor praying, and my father stumbling, being supported by friends from the port. Grandma Ruth hugged me on one side, holding Timmy on the other, while Grandpa Oliver remained silent, with a hard look I had never seen before. In the following months, life at home became unbearable. Dad barely showed up, and when he did, he was drunk, sometimes violent. He broke things, yelled at us. I, at 12, tried to care for Timmy in the house as best I could, but it was too much for a girl. That's when Grandma Ruth decided we would live with them. "You can't stay alone in that house anymore," she said one day, showing up with 2 empty suitcases. "Pack what you have, you're staying with us until your father straightens out." The move to my grandparents' house was like finding a safe harbor amid the storm. Grandma Ruth reorganized our lives. We started attending school regularly again, had schedules for studying, for helping with house chores, for playing. Grandpa Oliver was more reserved, stricter, but he respected her decisions. For almost a year, we lived like this, in a peaceful routine that was healing the wounds of losing Mom. Timmy started smiling again, behaving like a child. I grew even closer to Grandma Ruth, absorbing everything she taught me about plants, about life. Dad would show up from time to time, always promising he would straighten out, that he would soon come to get us, but he never kept his word. Then, when I was 13, came the second great loss. Grandma Ruth, who seemed so strong despite her age, suddenly fell ill. Unlike Mom, it was quick. A stroke, they said. One morning she couldn't get out of bed. The left side of her body wouldn't respond. Her speech was slurred. 3 days later, she was gone. Her funeral was very different from my mother's. People came from all over town, even from neighboring counties. People she had helped with her homemade remedies, with her advice, with her kindness. As the coffin was lowered into the ground, I noticed there was something different in my grandfather's eyes. It wasn't just sadness. It was something deeper, more disturbing. That same night, after all the visitors had left and Timmy was already asleep, Grandpa Oliver called me to the kitchen. He sat at the table, indicating I should do the same. His large, wrinkled hands held a cup of tea that had gone cold without him drinking it. "Eleanor," he said, in a voice I barely recognized, "things are going to change around here now. Timmy is going to your Aunt Celeste's house in Columbia. She's already agreed to take him in. As for you—" He paused, looking at me in a way that made me freeze inside. "You'll stay with me. You look a lot like your mother, you know. She was my only daughter, and now you're all I have left of her." At that moment, I didn't understand the weight of those words. I didn't understand why Timmy would be sent away while I would stay. I didn't understand what it meant to be all that was left of my mother for my grandfather. But something in the way he said it, in the way his eyes examined me, triggered an alert in me that I couldn't interpret. A week later, Timmy was taken to Columbia. I cried, hugging my little brother, promising we would see each other soon, that it was just for a while. But deep down, something told me that this separation would change our lives forever. And that's how, at 13, I was left alone in that big old house, with a grandfather who, with each passing day, seemed less like the man I knew before Grandma Ruth's death. The first days alone with Grandpa Oliver were strange, but not frightening. He seemed lost without Grandma Ruth, wandering around the house like a shadow, sometimes forgetting to eat meals. I tried to help as best I could, preparing what I knew in the kitchen: rice, a fried egg, a simple soup I'd learned from Grandma. He ate in silence, sometimes thanking me with a nod, and returned to his business. 3 weeks after Grandma Ruth's funeral, things started to change. It was a Friday afternoon. I had just returned from school. Grandpa Oliver was sitting in the living room with an old wooden box on his lap. When he saw me, he gestured for me to approach. "Sit here, girl," he said, pointing to the sofa beside him. I obeyed, curious about what that box might be. "This belonged to your mother," he continued, opening the lid carefully. Inside were some simple jewelry, hair ribbons, a wooden rosary, and a mother-of-pearl handled hairbrush. "Lenora was the most precious thing in my life," he said, his voice breaking a little. "When she was born, I swore nothing bad would happen to her as long as I lived." He took the brush and held it against the light coming through the window. "She had hair just like yours, you know, dark, straight, shiny. Sometimes she would spend hours getting ready in front of the mirror in her room." At that moment, he raised his eyes from the box and stared at me in a way that made my stomach turn cold. There was something hungry in that look, something that shouldn't be there. "Come with me," he said, suddenly rising. "I want to show you something." He took me to the room that had been my mother's when she was young. I already knew the room. It had an old wardrobe, a twin bed with a lace bedspread, a vanity with an oval mirror. The room was always closed. Grandma Ruth said it was to keep the memories preserved. Grandpa Oliver opened the door and made me enter. The air was stale, smelling of disuse. He turned on the light, a weak bulb that gave everything a yellowish tone, and closed the door behind us. He walked to the vanity, where there were several old perfume bottles, some hairpins, and a framed photo of my mother at 16. This was her favorite mirror, he said, running his hand over the frame of the oval mirror. She would sit here every night, brush her hair 100 times, I counted, and then say her prayers before sleep. He took the mother-of-pearl brush from the box and placed it on the vanity. Then he turned to me with a different look. "Eleanor, do you know you're the same age your mother was when this photo was taken?" he asked, pointing to the portrait. "It's amazing how alike you are." He picked up the photo and placed it next to my face, looking from the portrait to me and back to the portrait. The same eyes, the same face shape, even the same way of getting embarrassed when someone notices you. I tried to smile, uncomfortable, but there was something strange happening. Something in the way he compared, how his eyes traveled over my face, my body, as if he were trying to see someone else through me. "From today on," he said, putting the photo back on the vanity, "you'll use this room. It was your mother's room, now it will be yours. And every night, before bed, you'll sit here like she did and brush your hair 100 times, to honor her memory, to keep her presence alive in this house." "But Grandpa," I began to protest, "I like my room and—" "It's not a request, Eleanor," he interrupted, his voice hardening. "This is how it's going to be from now on. Your grandmother is no longer here to contradict me. In my house, I decide. And I've decided that you will keep your mother's memory alive. Understood?" I nodded, swallowing hard. There was something wrong with all this, but I was a 13-year-old girl, alone, with nowhere to go. That same night he came to the room to teach me the ritual. He said I should be dressed only in a white nightgown, like my mother wore. He handed me one that had been hers, kept in one of the drawers. It was too big for me, but he insisted I wear it. "Now sit in front of the mirror," he ordered, positioning himself behind me. I obeyed, trembling a little. "Take the brush and start combing, slowly, like she did." I started brushing my hair, embarrassed that he was there, watching my every move. In the mirror, I saw my reflection, and behind me, the figure of my grandfather, his eyes fixed on me. "Not like that," he said, irritated. He approached and took the brush from my hand. "Let me show you how she did it." He started brushing my hair, but there was something disturbing in the way he did it, as if he were caressing. His fingers touched my nape, my shoulders. I shrank instinctively. "Sit straight," he ordered. She had perfect posture, always upright, always elegant. I straightened my back, holding my breath. In the mirror, I saw my pale, frightened face, and I saw his face changing, as if he were seeing someone else there, not me. "My Lenora," he murmured, and a shiver ran down my spine. It wasn't me he was looking at. It was the ghost of my mother that he imagined seeing through me. After brushing my hair, he simply put the brush on the vanity and said, "Tomorrow you do it by yourself. I'll come to check if you're doing it right." And he left, leaving me trembling and confused. For the following nights, the ritual continued. I brushed my hair in front of the mirror while he watched from the door. As the weeks passed, he began to bring more things that had belonged to my mother: a pink lipstick, a dress, a pair of ballet flats. "Try it on," he would say. "I want to see how it looks on you." With each new item, with each new ritual, his behavior became more disturbing. He began to ask me to change clothes in front of him. "It's to see if the dress fits right," he justified. I was reluctant, but he insisted, saying he was the head of the house, that I owed him obedience, that my father had abandoned us, and only he cared about me. When I turned 14, the ritual got even worse. He demanded that I change completely in front of the mirror while he watched, sitting in a chair in the corner of the room. I tried to cover myself, to turn my back, but he would yell when I did. "Turn to the mirror." She always looked in the mirror when she changed. With my back to him, facing the mirror, I would take off my clothes and put on the white nightgown, quickly, trying to expose myself as little as possible. But I felt his eyes on me all the time, and I heard his breathing changing, getting heavier. From the chair where he sat came sometimes a creak, a rhythmic movement. I kept my eyes fixed on my own face in the mirror, refusing to look at his reflection, refusing to understand what was happening there. After the ritual, I would lie in bed, curled up, and cry silently until falling asleep. In the first months, I wrote desperate letters to Timmy, to my father, asking for help. But Grandpa controlled the mail. No letter left that house. At school, I became quiet, withdrawn. I was ashamed, as if everyone could see what was happening inside those walls. As if I were stained by something dirty that wasn't my fault, but still consumed me. A teacher, Mrs. Wallace, noticed my change. One day after class, she called me to talk. "Is everything okay at home, Eleanor?" she asked, her kind eyes searching mine. I thought about telling her, about screaming the truth. But at the last moment, fear won. "Everything's fine, Mrs. Wallace," I lied. "I just miss Grandma Ruth." She didn't insist, but now and then she observed me with a worried look. Perhaps if I had told her, everything would have been different. But the fear of what might happen, of where they would send me, of how I would be far from Timmy, made me keep that horrible secret. Over time, I developed a defense mechanism. While I was in front of the mirror, under my grandfather's sick gaze, I would disconnect. My body was there, obeying his orders, but my mind traveled far away. I imagined I was in the yard with Grandma Ruth, learning about plants. Or at Charleston Beach, feeling the sand between my toes, the salty wind on my face. Anywhere but that room, that mirror that reflected my humiliation. And so, day after day, night after night, I lived in that silent nightmare, with no one to defend me, no one to save me. A prisoner of flesh and blood, for the sick desire of a man who confused his granddaughter with the daughter he should never have desired in that way. Until, at 15, I found something that would change everything. What I found was a key. Small, old, hidden under a loose floorboard in the room. I discovered it by chance, when I dropped an earring and it rolled under the bed. As I looked for it, I noticed that one of the wooden boards wobbled. Curious, I lifted it, and there it was, a small brass key, tied to a piece of faded ribbon. For days I carried that key with me, hidden in a small cloth pouch that I sewed myself and attached to the inside of my clothes. I didn't know what it opened, but I felt it was important. It was my secret, the first thing Grandpa Oliver didn't control in my life since I began living that nightmare. Time passed, and the rituals in front of the mirror became more elaborate, more humiliating. It wasn't enough anymore to just change clothes and brush my hair. Grandpa began to bring makeup that had belonged to my mother. "Put on lipstick like she did," he would order. "The blush on your cheeks like this." And sometimes he himself would apply it, his trembling hands touching my face in a way that made me nauseated. There were days when he would drink before the ritual. On those nights it was even worse. He talked more, said things a granddaughter should never hear from a grandfather. "You're as beautiful as she was," he would mutter. "Sometimes, when I look at you, it's as if she had come back to me. My Lenora, my little girl." And then, there were moments when he came too close. He would stand behind me, so close I could feel his whiskey breath on my neck. His hands would rest on my shoulders, then slide a little, and I would close my eyes tightly, disconnecting completely, going to the safe place inside my head where none of that was happening. At school, my performance declined. I couldn't concentrate, living in a constant state of alert and exhaustion. Mrs. Wallace tried to talk to me again, this time more directly. "Eleanor, I'm worried about you," she said, sitting next to me during recess. "You were one of the best students, and now you can barely turn in assignments. Your eyes, they look so sad. If something's happening, you can tell me. I can help." I opened my mouth, thinking about telling everything. But then I remembered my grandfather's threats. "If you tell anyone, I'll say you're lying, that you're making up stories to get attention. And no one will believe you because I'm a respected man in this town. They'll send you to a boarding school or worse, and you'll never see your brother again." "It's nothing, Mrs. Wallace," I replied, forcing a smile. "I just haven't been sleeping well. I've been having nightmares." That, at least, wasn't a lie. When I turned 16, something happened that intensified my suffering even more. Timmy, my brother, came to visit us. Aunt Celeste brought him to spend a weekend in Charleston. He was different, taller, with his voice changing, No longer the little boy I knew, but his eyes were the same, gentle and curious. It was wonderful to see him, hug him, hear about his life in Colombia. He talked about school, friends, things Aunt Celeste let him do. He seemed happy, adjusted. I missed him so much it hurt, but at the same time, I was relieved that he was away from that house, that situation. On Sunday, before he left, we managed a few moments alone in the yard. He looked at me seriously, a very mature look for his 13 years. "Eleanor, are you really okay? You seem different, sad." I swallowed hard, holding back tears. I wanted so much to tell him, share that burden. But what good would it do? He was just a boy. He couldn't help me, and I didn't want to taint his new life with my horrors. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just missing you and Mom, and Grandma Ruth." He nodded, not totally convinced. "If you need anything, write to me, okay? Aunt Celeste always reads the letters you send." At that moment, I realized that Grandpa was intercepting not only the letters I sent, but also those Timmy sent me. One more control, one more isolation. I smiled at my brother, promising to write, knowing he would never receive my words. After Timmy's departure, Grandpa was in a bad mood. That night, the ritual was particularly humiliating. He brought a dress that had been Mom's, a party dress, light blue, with small pearls embroidered on the neckline. "Put it on," he ordered, throwing the dress on the bed. I obeyed, trembling. The dress was beautiful, but it caused a tightness in my chest to wear it. It was as if I were profaning her memory. "Now dance," he said, sitting in the chair. "Your mother loved to dance. At her 15th birthday party, she danced the waltz with me, dressed exactly like this." I froze, not knowing what to do. There had never been such an order before. "Dance!" he shouted, hitting the floor with his cane. I began to move, awkwardly, without music, just swaying from side to side, looking at the mirror and seeing the pathetic figure I was, a frightened girl in a dress too big, dancing to satisfy an old man's sick fantasy. "Not like that," he growled, getting up. He grabbed my hand forcefully, pulled me to him, like this. And he began to guide me in an imaginary waltz around the small room, squeezing my waist tightly, his breathing heavy and smelling of whiskey. I closed my eyes, disconnecting completely, letting my body be dragged around the room while my mind fled far, very far away. When he finally released me, I stumbled to the edge of the bed and sat, exhausted. He stood looking at me, his eyes cloudy with drink and something darker, more disturbing. "You'll never be like her," he muttered, a mixture of anger and disappointment in his voice. "You'll never have her grace, her beauty. You're just a pale imitation." And he left, slamming the door, leaving me there, still dressed in the party attire of a dead woman. That night, after he fell asleep, I heard his snores coming from the room across the hall. I made a decision. I needed to find out more about my mother, about what really happened to her. Maybe this would help me understand, find a way out of that hell. I remembered the key I had found. I began to test it on all the locked drawers in the house, on cabinets, on old trunks. Nothing worked. Until, on a night of insomnia, I had a flash. I looked at the oval mirror, at its ornate frame. There was a small lock on the back, almost imperceptible. With trembling hands, I fitted the key. It turned easily, as if it had been used recently. I heard a click, and to my surprise, the back of the mirror opened like a door, revealing a secret compartment. Inside was a stack of yellowed letters, tied with a faded red ribbon. I picked them up carefully, feeling the weight of those papers. I sat on the bed, turned on the small lamp beside it, and began to read. The first ones were love letters, exchanged between my mother and a man named Ernest. Passionate letters, full of plans for the future, for a life away from Charleston. My mother had a secret boyfriend, someone my grandfather clearly didn't approve of. My dearest Ernest, one of the letters said, I've already spoken to Mother about our plans. She supports us, but is afraid of Father's reaction. You know how controlling he is, how he never lets me breathe. Sometimes I'm afraid of him, of the way he looks at me when he thinks I'm not watching. I continued reading, my heart racing. In later letters, the tone changed, became more desperate. We need to leave soon. I can't stand living in this house anymore. Father found out about you and made terrible threats. He said he would rather see me dead than see me with another man. I'm afraid, Ernest, afraid of what he might do. The last letter was the most disturbing of all, dated just 2 weeks before my mother's death. My love, I need to tell you something that fills me with joy and fear at the same time. I'm expecting your child. Our girl, yes, I feel it's a girl, is already growing inside me. Mother is the only one who knows, and she swore to keep the secret. Father must never find out. We need to flee as soon as possible. Come get me on Friday, as we arranged. I'll be waiting at the usual place, with just the essentials. Let's start a new life, away from this place, away from him. I read and reread that letter, tears streaming down my face. My mother was pregnant when she died, with a child from a man who wasn't my father, a man named Ernest, whom she loved and with whom she planned to run away. What happened to her wasn't an accident, as they always told me. The sudden fever that took her in a few days, the rushed funeral without an autopsy, the heavy silence that fell over her death. My grandfather had found out. He discovered everything, the secret boyfriend, the pregnancy, the escape plans, and he didn't allow it. He preferred to see her dead than lose her to another man. That was when I understood the true extent of the horror in which I lived. I wasn't just suffering abuse. I was in the hands of a murderer. The man who probably killed my mother now kept me prisoner, using me as a perverse substitute for her. That night, after discovering the letters, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the revelations spinning in my mind like a whirlwind. My grandfather wasn't just a disturbed man with sick desires, he was a murderer. He killed my mother because he couldn't bear her loving another man, carrying another man's child. And I was under his complete power, alone in that isolated house, with no one to help me. If he was capable of killing his own daughter, what would stop him from doing the same to me if I confronted him? If I tried to escape? The next morning, I went down for breakfast, pretending nothing had changed. I served his coffee as I always did, put the bread on the table, smiled when necessary. But inside, I was different. The fear was still there, but now there was something more. A cold, calculating anger that grew with each hour. "You're quiet today," he commented, looking at me over the cup. "Just tired, Grandpa," I replied, avoiding his eyes. "I didn't sleep well." He grunted, returning his attention to the newspaper. That newspaper that always portrayed him as a respectable citizen of Charleston, a dedicated widower, a loving grandfather. The mask he wore for the world, while inside the house, he was a monster. In the following days, I continued the charade, obedient during the day, submissive during the nightly rituals. But while he watched me in front of the mirror, while I danced in dresses that had been my mother's, my mind worked, planning, calculating. The letters had mentioned an Ernest, the man my mother loved, the father of the baby she was carrying when she died. Could he still be living in Charleston? Did he know what had happened to her? I needed to find him, but how to do that without alerting my grandfather? The opportunity came on a Sunday afternoon, when Mr. Jenkins, an old friend of my grandfather's, came to visit. They sat on the porch to have coffee and talk about old times. I served them, silent as a ghost, when I heard Mr. Jenkins mention a name that made my heart leap. "I heard Ernest Hayes is back in town," he commented casually. "After all these years in Atlanta, he came back to take care of his sick mother. Strange, isn't it? After all that scandal with your girl, I thought he would never set foot in Charleston again." I saw my grandfather's face harden, his hands gripping the chair arms so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "Don't mention that name in my house," he said, voice trembling with contained rage. "Sorry, Oliver," Mr. Jenkins replied, clearly uncomfortable. "Didn't mean to bring up bad memories. Just thought you should know, in case you run into him around town." The conversation changed course, but that information kept hammering in my head. Ernest Hayes. He was alive. He was in Charleston. And apparently there was some scandal involving him and my mother, something the whole town knew about. That night, the ritual in front of the mirror was the worst of all. My grandfather had been drinking since the afternoon, after Mr. Jenkins left. When he called me to the room, his eyes were red, his voice more slurred than normal. "Today you'll wear this," he said, throwing a wedding dress yellowed by time onto the bed. "It was your grandmother's. Your mother never got to wear it, the ungrateful girl. She preferred to run away with that. His hands closed into fists, and for a moment I thought he was going to hit me. But he just threw himself into the chair, observing me with those eyes that seemed to burn. "Get dressed," he ordered. With trembling hands, I put on the wedding dress. It was far too big for me, dragged on the floor. The fabric smelled of mold, of the past, of secrets kept for decades. "Now turn to the mirror and say, 'I promise to be faithful to you, Oliver, all the days of my life.'" I froze, the horror of what he was asking hitting me like a punch. He wanted me to interpret not just my mother now, but also my grandmother. Or worse, he wanted me to be the bride that my mother never was for him. I can't do that, Grandpa," I whispered. He got up with a jump, surprisingly agile for a man his age. In 2 steps, he was beside me, holding my arm with enough force to leave marks. "You'll do what I tell you to," he growled, his face so close to mine that I could smell the whiskey breath. "You owe me obedience. I raised you when your father abandoned you. I gave you a roof, food, education, and you will respect me." "Like you respected my mother?" The words came out before I could contain them. "Like you respected her when you found out she was pregnant with another man's child? When she wanted to run away with Ernest Hayes?" His eyes widened, first in shock, then in fury. The hand that held my arm closed even tighter. "Where did you hear that name? Who told you about him?" "I read the letters," I confessed, raising my chin in defiance. "The letters Mom hid behind the mirror. I know what you did to her." "I know you killed her when you found out she was going to run away." It was as if a dam had broken. All the fear, all the anger, all the humiliations of those years exploded in my words. I was shouting now, not caring if the neighbors would hear, if the whole world would hear. "You killed her, and now you want to turn me into her. You want me to be the daughter you lost, the woman you never had." His expression changed. The anger gave way to something colder, more calculating. He released me, taking a step back. "You have no proof of anything," he said, his voice suddenly calm. "Nobody would believe you. I'm Oliver Miller, respected by everyone in this town. And you? You're just a disturbed girl who lost her mother too early, a girl who makes up stories for attention." He walked to the door, turned to me one last time. "And if you try to tell anyone at all, about your crazy theories or about our private moments, well, accidents happen, Eleanor. Like it happened to your mother." The door closed, and I collapsed on the floor, still dressed as a bride, trembling uncontrollably. His threat was clear. If I spoke, he would kill me, like he killed my mother, and no one would suspect him, the respectable widower, the dedicated grandfather. That night, I cried until I had no more tears. When the sun began to rise, I had made a decision. I couldn't continue living in that hell. I couldn't wait for someone to save me. I would have to save myself. I remembered something Grandma Ruth taught me years ago, when she showed me her herbs. "Some plants heal," she would say. "Others can do harm if used the wrong way. You need to know the nature of each one well." And then, a plan began to form in my mind. A plan that would require patience, care, and courage. If he could use my body as an object of his sick fantasies, I would use his own pride and vanity against him. My first action was to find Ernest Hayes. Not to ask for help. I had already decided this was a path I would walk alone, but to better understand what happened to my mother, to confirm my suspicions. For days, I made up excuses to go out alone. I needed to buy school supplies, I said, or do group work at a classmate's house. Small lies that gave me a few hours of freedom. I discovered that Ernest worked at a pharmacy in the town center, a middle-aged man, graying at the temples, sad eyes. On the first day, I just observed from afar. On the second, I gathered courage and entered the pharmacy, pretending I needed to buy something for a headache. When he helped me, his eyes widened as if he had seen a ghost. "My God," he murmured, "you're the spitting image of her." "Of my mother," I confirmed in a low voice. "Lenora." He turned pale, looking around to make sure we were alone in the store. "You're her daughter. Eleanor, isn't it? How did you find me?" "I need to talk to you," I said urgently. "About what happened to her, about my grandfather." He hesitated, clearly frightened, but ended up agreeing to meet me after his shift, on a bench in the church square where no one would find it strange for an adult and a teenager to be talking. And it was there, as the sun was setting, that Ernest told me everything. How he and my mother fell in love in secret. How my grandfather had always been possessive, controlling, with a sick jealousy of his only daughter. How they planned to flee when they discovered the pregnancy. But on the night we arranged to meet, she didn't show up, he said, his voice breaking with emotion. I found out later that she was sick, with a mysterious fever. And then... He couldn't finish, covering his face with his hands. "You think he poisoned her?" I asked directly. Ernest raised his face, looked into my eyes. "I always thought so. Never could prove it. I tried to talk to the police at the time, but who would believe me against Oliver Miller? I was thrown out of the station, threatened. I ended up leaving Charleston." At that moment, all my suspicions were confirmed. I thanked Ernest for the conversation and got up to leave. "Eleanor," he called, "you're not safe in that house. Let me help. I can talk to the police. We can—" "No," I interrupted. "No one can help me now. But don't worry. I'll take care of everything." And it was with that determination that I returned home, ready to execute the plan that would forever change my life, and the life of the man who destroyed my mother and was trying to destroy me. My plan began to take shape meticulously. The meeting with Ernest gave me more than confirmation. It gave me access. When I told him vaguely that I needed a way to protect myself, he understood between the lines. As a pharmacist, he knew substances that I would never have access to alone. "I can't give you anything that would cause permanent damage," he said hesitantly. "That would be unethical and illegal. But I can give you something that causes enough discomfort for you to gain time and escape, if necessary." He gave me a small vial with a clear liquid. "This is a potent skin irritant. In direct contact, it causes redness, intense itching, a burning sensation. It's not lethal, but it's extremely unpleasant. Use it only in self-defense, Eleanor." I thanked him, but I knew that was just the beginning. What I was planning was more complex, more definitive. I didn't just want to escape. I wanted justice. I wanted him to never be able to do to another human being what he did to my mother and to me. At school, I began to pay more attention in chemistry classes. I asked the teacher questions about chemical reactions, about caustic substances. "It's for a special project," I explained, when he seemed surprised by my sudden interest. I took detailed notes, researched at the town library. At home, I began to observe more carefully my grandfather's hygiene habits. His vanity was his weak point. Even at 70, he prided himself on his appearance, on his hair still dark with few white strands, which I knew he secretly died. He had a strict routine. Every morning he would spend half an hour in the bathroom shaving, applying lotions, colognes. Among his products, there was a specific aftershave lotion he used daily, an amber liquid in a glass vial with a brass cap. It was imported, expensive, and he guarded it like a treasure. "It was your grandfather who taught me to be a gentleman," he would sometimes say when visitors commented on his pleasant smell. "A man of respect takes care of his appearance." That lotion would be my means. For weeks, I worked discreetly. On afternoons when I had permission to go to the library, I diverted my path to Ernest's pharmacy. He provided me with small quantities of substances that, in isolation, were harmless, but which, combined in the right way, would produce the effect I sought. "Don't tell me what this is for," he would say, handing me the vials in a discreet bag. "Just promise me you're safe." "I am," I would answer, "or I will be soon." In the yard of the house, I reactivated the small herb garden that Grandma Ruth maintained. "I want to learn more about the plants she loved," I explained to my grandfather when he questioned. He liked the idea, seeing in it a way for me to be more feminine, more like my grandmother and my mother. Little did he know that among the innocent herbs, mint, rosemary, basil, I cultivated some more potent species whose extracts would be crucial ingredients in my formula. In a common school notebook, disguised as biology notes, I recorded my experiments. I tested small quantities on leaves, on pieces of fabric, observing the reactions. I adjusted the proportions, refined the mixture. It needed to be perfect, strong enough to cause the damage I intended, but not so obvious that it would seem a deliberate attack. The ideal opportunity came in June 1970, when I turned 17. My grandfather, in one of his rare gestures of false kindness, decided to give me a present, an entire day in town, alone, with some money to spend. "You've been a good girl, obedient," he said. "You deserve a reward." What he didn't know is that I would use that day to finalize my preparations. I bought a small vial identical to his aftershave lotion. I briefly met with Ernest, who gave me the last component I needed. "Eleanor, are you sure you don't want me to intervene?" he asked, concern evident on his face. "I can talk to the authorities. I can take you away from here." "No, Ernest," I replied firmly. "This is my battle, and it's almost over." That night, I executed the final part of the plan. After my grandfather fell asleep, helped by a special tea I prepared with an herb that induced deep sleep, I silently entered his bathroom. With steady hands, I replaced the contents of the aftershave lotion with my mixture. The liquid had the same color, the same appearance, but its effects would be completely different. I returned to my room, the room that once was my mother's, and waited, sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at the oval mirror that had witnessed so many humiliations. For the first time in years, I felt no fear looking at that mirror. I felt power. The next morning, I woke up early but remained in the room, waiting. I knew exactly when my grandfather would enter the bathroom, when he would start his morning routine. I knew the exact moment when he would apply the lotion. The scream came precisely at the time I expected, a sound I had never heard before coming from my grandfather's throat. It wasn't of anger nor authority, as I was used to. It was a scream of pure pain, of panic. I left the room, pretending to be frightened by the noise. I saw my grandfather staggering out of the bathroom, hands clutching the lower part of his body, face contorted in an agony that gave me a satisfaction I've never confessed to anyone until today. "What is it, Grandpa?" I asked, with perfect innocence. "What happened?" He couldn't speak, just moaned, trembling. His face was red, sweaty, eyes wide with pain and confusion. "I'll call for help," I said, running to the phone. The ambulance arrived in less than 20 minutes. The paramedics found him still on the floor, semi-conscious from pain. They asked questions that I answered with as much vagueness as possible. "I don't know what happened. He was in the bathroom, shaving as always, and then I heard the scream." At the hospital, the doctors were perplexed. "It looks like a severe allergic reaction," one of them said, "but I've never seen anything like it. There are signs of chemical burns in the genital region and, well, the damage is extensive." I stayed by his bed in the hospital, playing the role of the dedicated and concerned granddaughter. When we were alone, however, I leaned close to his ear and whispered, "I know what you did to my mother. This is for her. And for me. You will never use your masculinity to hurt anyone again." His eyes widened, finally understanding, but he was too weak, too doped up on painkillers to react. The official diagnosis was severe allergic reaction to personal hygiene product, complicated by chemical burn. The doctor explained that sometimes ingredients in beauty products can undergo alterations over time, becoming irritating or even caustic. Especially these imported products, without proper inspection, he added. The most serious part, which was only revealed to me as the closest relative, was that the damage was permanent. The tissues in the genital region had suffered such severe necrosis that any sexual function would be impossible from then on. In addition, there would be loss of control over urination, requiring the use of medical devices for the rest of his life. "I'm sorry, miss," said the doctor in a solemn tone. "Your grandfather will never be, well, the same man again." I nodded, pretending sadness, while inside I felt only a cold calm. Justice had been done. Not in the way society would approve, but in the only way possible under the circumstances. He would continue to live. I'm not a murderer like him, but he would have to live with a constant humiliation, a daily reminder of his crimes. My grandfather was hospitalized for almost a month. When he finally was discharged, he returned home like a shadow of the man he had been. He would sit for hours on the porch, staring at nothing, barely speaking. The pride, the arrogance, the power he displayed, all gone. The mirror ritual never happened again. He could barely look at me now, would avert his eyes when I entered the room. Our roles had reversed. Now I was the one with power, and he was the one who feared. I continued to care for him, for appearances. The entire town commented on how dedicated I was, how admirable the way I took care of my poor grandfather after his accident. No one suspected the truth. No one except Ernest, who kept our secret until the end. 6 months after the incident, I received a letter from Aunt Celeste. My brother Timmy, still 13, had received a scholarship to a boarding school in Richmond. She asked if I would like to move to Columbia, live with her while I finished my studies. "I imagine it's hard to take care of your grandfather alone in the condition he's in," she wrote. "There's room for you here, and we could hire someone to help with his care." The offer was tempting, but I had other plans. I replied thanking her, but explaining that I needed to stay in Charleston. What I didn't say is that I wasn't finished with what I started. On an October afternoon, after the nurse who came daily to take care of my grandfather had left, I sat beside him on the porch. He was in the wheelchair, looking at the garden that I now cultivated alone. "Grandpa," I said, my voice calm, controlled, "I want you to know something. I found Ernest Hayes." He slowly turned his head toward me, his eyes revealing fear for the first time. "He told me everything about Mom, about the baby she was expecting, about how you poisoned her when you found out she was planning to flee." My grandfather opened his mouth to deny it, but I interrupted him. "Don't worry, I won't report you to the police. I don't have concrete evidence. It would be your word against mine. And besides..." I paused, smiling softly. "I think you're already paying for what you did." I stood up, adjusting the shawl on my shoulders. "I'm moving to Columbia next month. I've already arranged for a nurse who will live here, take care of you full-time. She's very competent, but she's not family, so she won't have the same patience that I have with your special needs." His eyes filled with tears, of anger, of fear, of shame, I can't say. For the first time in my entire life, I saw my grandfather cry. "One last thing," I added, leaning closer. "That mirror in Mom's room? I had it removed this morning. donated it to a thrift store in town. Someone will buy it, take it home, use it to admire themselves, and you will never be able to use it for your perversions again. I turned my back and entered the house, feeling a weight being lifted from my shoulders. It was done. The cycle of abuse that began with my mother, that continued with me, was finally broken. In November 1970, I moved to Colombia to live with Aunt Celeste. For the first time in years, I felt free. I finished high school, got a job as an assistant in a local pharmacy, an irony that didn't escape me. I reconnected with Timmy during holidays, slowly rebuilding our sibling relationship. As for my grandfather, I learned that he lived 7 more years in that house in Charleston, a broken man, without the strength or the will to continue his evils. When he died in 1977, I went to the funeral, not out of respect or mourning, but to make sure that chapter of my life was definitely closed. Ernest was also there, discreet, keeping his distance. We exchanged just a look, a nod. Words weren't necessary between us. After the funeral, I sold the house in Charleston. I used the money to establish myself better, continue my studies. Eventually, I graduated in pharmacy, following in the footsteps of the man who, in a way, helped me conquer my freedom. And that's how, my dears, I managed to escape the cycle of abuse and control that almost destroyed my life, just as it destroyed my mother's. It wasn't an easy path, nor always one that others would understand. But it was the path I found to survive, and eventually, to live. Today, at 72, I live a quiet life here in Greenfield. My little corner of peace, as I like to call it. The town welcomed me almost 30 years ago, when I moved here with my late husband, George. He was a forest engineer and received an offer to work in conservation at the Green Mountain National Forest, not far from here. We came thinking we would stay a few years, but ended up falling in love with the place, the people, the pace of life. And we stayed. George left us 8 years ago, from a sudden heart attack. It was hard, very hard. We had been married for over 30 years, built a life together. I met him in Boston, where I went to work after graduating in pharmacy. He came into the pharmacy where I worked looking for something for allergies. We talked, he invited me for coffee, and from that coffee was born a love story that lasted until his last day. My 2 children are grown, with their own families. Gabriella, the eldest, lives in Hartford with her husband and my 2 teenage grandchildren, Helen and Philip. She followed an academic career, is a university professor of botany. I think she inherited a bit of my passion for plants, but in a more scientific way. Daniel, my youngest, lives farther away in Portland. He's a pediatrician, married to Robert. The 2 adopted a girl, Lucy, who is now 6 years old, and is the joy of my days when she comes to visit during vacations. My daily routine is simple, but satisfying. I wake up early with the birds singing. I prepare my coffee, sit on the porch to watch the sun rising behind the maple trees. Then, I go to my herb garden. It's my sacred corner, where I feel connected to nature, to my roots, to the memory of my grandmother Ruth. The knowledge about medicinal plants, which began as a childhood curiosity alongside my grandmother, became my true vocation after I retired from the pharmacy. I started studying more deeply, reading books, taking courses. Today, I have a small notebook where I note all the properties of each plant, the possible combinations, the preparation methods. The neighbors here in the neighborhood already know, when they have a health problem, they come to talk to me first. Miss Eleanor, I have a terrible migraine. Miss Eleanor, my digestion is awful. Miss Eleanor, I can't sleep properly. And there I go to the garden to pick the right herbs, prepare the teas, the infusions, the compresses. I don't charge anything for this. I do it out of love, out of gratitude for the life I have today. 3 times a week, I give volunteer classes at the neighborhood community center. I teach younger women about the healing power of plants. It's knowledge that can't be lost, I always say. Our grandmothers knew, our mothers forgot, and now it's up to us to rescue this wisdom. On Sundays, I go to Mass at St. Peter's Church nearby. I'm not devout, but I find comfort in faith, in community. After Mass, there's always a collective coffee in the parish hall. The ladies bring cakes, pies, homemade cookies. I bring my cornbread with fennel, which everyone loves and always asks for the recipe. Once a month, I receive a visit from my friend Margaret. We met in the town's craft group over 20 years ago. She does crochet, I do embroidery. We spend the afternoon chatting, laughing at ourselves, remembering old stories, commenting on the town's news, which isn't much, to be honest. It's a type of friendship that can only be earned with the years, with maturity. On special dates, like Christmas or birthdays, my children come to visit with their families. The house becomes full, noisy, alive. I cook for days, preparing all the favorite dishes of each one. I see my grandchildren growing, becoming more independent with each visit. Helen, the oldest, has already asked me to teach her about herbs. "Grandma, I want to learn everything you know," she said the last time. My heart filled with joy hearing that. Of all the things I've achieved in life, peace is what I value most. Peace of mind, peace in the heart. I went through terrible moments, it's true. I carried burdens too heavy for a girl, faced demons that many couldn't imagine. But I survived. Not just survived. I learned to live fully. When I look back at that frightened girl in front of the mirror, I feel a deep compassion. I wish I could hug her, tell her everything would be all right in the end. That she would find love, build a family, have a meaningful life. The past left scars, I can't deny. Even today, I have difficulty with large mirrors. I prefer the small ones, just functional. My house doesn't have full-length mirrors, and even the smaller ones are in discreet places, never highlighted. It's a small adjustment I make to maintain my serenity. I also never managed to establish a close relationship with my father after everything. He continued his life erratically, rarely appearing, always with promises he didn't keep. But I made peace with this absence, understood that he too was a victim, in his way, of circumstances and his own weaknesses. With my brother Timmy, the story was different. We rebuilt our bond over the years. He lives in Denver today, is a retired math teacher. We talk every week by phone, and once a year he comes to visit me, or I go there. When we're together, it's as if the years of separation never existed. Life taught me that true strength isn't in revenge, although sometimes it seems the only path possible. True strength is in the ability to rebuild, to flourish even after the worst storms. Like those plants in my garden that, after being drastically pruned, come back stronger, more beautiful. And that's the lesson I carry with me every day as I care for my herbs, my flowers, my simple and blessed life here in Greenfield. My dear viewers who have stayed with me until here, I want to leave you with some words from the bottom of my heart. If you are going through difficult times, through abuse, through situations that seem to have no way out, know that you are not alone. In every corner of this world, there are people willing to extend a hand, to listen, to help. I learned through pain that silence only protects those who hurt us. Today, unlike in my time, there are stronger laws, there are support networks, there are people prepared to believe you. Please, don't keep to yourself what hurts you. Seek help, even if it seems frightening, even if it seems impossible. You know, when I was just a girl trembling in front of that mirror, I thought I would never feel joy in life again. I thought the shadows of the past would always chase me, but I discovered that we are stronger than we imagine. That life, no matter how hard it is at times, always offers new chances, new paths. The mirror that reflected my pain for so many years ended up becoming a symbol of liberation. When I got rid of it, it was as if I were getting rid of the invisible chains that bound me to that house, that man, that past. The pain we carry can destroy us or transform us. It can turn us into bitter, distrustful people, or it can give us a special sensitivity to recognize suffering in others and extend a hand to help. The choice is ours. The path I chose wasn't perfect, wasn't one that authorities or society would approve. It was the possible path for a girl without options, without support, without a way out. Today, decades later, I see that there are other possibilities, other resources. If you're hearing my story and identifying with it, seek those resources. Seek the help that I didn't have. In any country, in any culture, abuse is a violation of the most basic human rights. No one has the right to use their power to hurt, control, or humiliate another person. No one has the right to steal your dignity, your voice, your future. When we plant seeds in the garden, we know not all will germinate. Some will be carried by the wind, others will be eaten by birds. But those that find fertile soil, water, and sun, they grow and blossom, sometimes in ways we can't imagine. Our life is like that. Even in the worst circumstances, the seeds of hope, resilience, inner strength are there, waiting for the right moment to sprout. Today, I look at my herb garden and see in it proof that life always finds a way. Even after the harshest winter, spring comes, bringing new leaves, new flowers, new possibilities. So, my dear, don't give up. Don't allow the shadows of the past to steal the light of your future. You are stronger than you imagine, more resilient than you believe. And you deserve a full, safe, happy life. And to all who watched me until here, I ask a special favor. If this video touched your heart, if my story made sense to you, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. Each subscription is like a little seed planted. It's like saying that stories like mine matter, that they can help other people who are going through difficult times. Do it now, don't wait even one more minute. And leave in the comments the word rebirth, just so I know who stayed with me until the end of this journey. Let's create together a chain of support and hope, because no one should face life's storms alone. Thank you for listening to me, for giving me a few minutes of your time. May God bless each one of you, and may the peace I found after so many struggles also find a place in your hearts. He tore my wedding dress in church and left me naked at the altar. What no one expected was that my mother-in-law would be my salvation. For 30 years, that religious family's secret destroyed lives until my humiliation exposed the hidden truth. Hello, my dears. What a joy to have you here with me today. I'm Eleanor Jenkins Thompson, 78 years young, and I'm coming to you from Seabreeze, a lovely little coastal town in North Carolina. Today, I live in a simple house, but with a garden full of flowers in the front yard, those colorful ones that brighten the heart of everyone who passes by. I have my begonias, my daisies, and my sunflowers that face the sun all day long, as if they're smiling at the sky. Every morning I wake up early, even before the sun appears. I like to prepare my hot coffee with that homemade bread I make myself. The recipe is from my late mother, God rest her soul. Afterward, I go tend to my plants, water each one with great care. It's like they're my children too, Each has its own little way, some need more water, others more shade. In the afternoon, my grandchildren come to visit me. There are 6 in all. The oldest ones are already in college, imagine that. And the youngest ones are still in elementary school. I teach them how to embroider, tell old stories, and sometimes we make cookies together. Gabriella, my 8-year-old granddaughter, says she wants to learn all of Grandma's secrets to teach to her children someday. Isn't that sweet? I started telling my stories when my grandson Teddy asked me to talk about what life was like when I was a young girl. He had a school assignment about family memories and wanted to know how Grandma lived. At first, I only told the beautiful things, But then, with time, I understood that our pain teaches too, and that the scars I carry might help others avoid the same suffering. I'm sitting here in my patchwork armchair with my crochet in my lap and my cat Romeo sleeping at my feet. The window is open, and you can smell the ocean mixed with the garden flowers. It's from here that I'll tell you a story I kept for many years. Before I begin, if you could give this video a like and subscribe to the channel, I'd be very grateful. That's how more people can hear our stories and perhaps find comfort in this old grandma's words. And you, my dears who are watching now, tell me in the comments, what town are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? Are you having your morning coffee, or perhaps after lunch, or maybe in the evening before bed? I love reading all the comments and knowing where people come from who take a moment of their day to listen to this grandma's stories. Let me know, okay? Let's create a chain of affection. Today I'm going to tell you about the day that should have been the happiest of my life, but which turned into the beginning of a difficult journey. It's a story about betrayal, where you least expect it, and about how, sometimes, the person who comes to save you is the one you least imagine. I was born and raised in Millfield, a small town in Western Virginia, near the border with West Virginia. It was a tiny place where everyone knew everyone. My father, Gerald Jenkins, was a hard-working man, one of those who woke up with the chickens and only returned home when the sun had long since set. He had a general store in town, selling a bit of everything: grains, fabrics, tools. We weren't rich, but food never lacked on our table. My mother, Alice Jenkins, was a seamstress. Good heavens, what blessed hands that woman had! She made wedding dresses that looked like they came from magazines, even though she never studied for it. She learned from her mother, my grandmother Eleanor, who was also a seamstress. It was a gift that passed from mother to daughter, like a precious inheritance. We were 4 siblings. I was the only girl, the youngest, born after 3 boys. Paul, the oldest, was always my father's right-hand man at the store. Eric, the middle one, was a teacher at the local school, and Oliver, who came before me, was the only one who left town. He went to study medicine in Richmond and ended up staying there. Being the only girl and the youngest, I was my father's little darling, but also the one who helped my mother the most with household chores and with the sewing. Our house was simple, but very cozy. It had 3 bedrooms, one for my parents, one for the boys, and one just for me, which was the smallest of all, but I loved it. The walls were wooden, painted light blue, and the roof made a huge noise when it rained heavily, like it was going to collapse. In the backyard, we had a huge apple tree, a peach tree, and several chickens that scratched around all day long. My childhood days were full of work, but also joy. I woke up early to help my mother make breakfast for my father and brothers. Then I went to school. I studied at Millfield Elementary, which was about a 20-minute walk from our house. I remember that in winter, which was harsh there in the mountains, my hands would be so cold I could barely hold the pencil when I arrived. After school, I helped my mother with the dresses. First, just threading needles and sorting buttons. As I grew older, I learned to sew too. By 10, I knew how to do hems and sew on buttons. By 12, I was helping embroider details on wedding dresses. It was work that required patience, but filled me with pride when I saw the brides leaving our house looking beautiful to get married in the little church in town. My childhood girlfriends were few, but very dear. Dorothy, the pharmacist's daughter, who was the same age as me. Nancy, who lived next door and came to play with me after we finished our chores. And Catherine, who was a bit older and already dreamed of being a teacher like my brother Eric. We played Ring Around the Rosie in the churchyard, hide and seek among the trees in the square, and with dolls that my mother made for us. On weekends, when I wasn't helping at home, we'd go to the Millfield Creek, which ran close to town. There, we'd sit on the bank, with our feet in the water, talking about the dreams we had for the future. The entire town revolved around the church. The pastor was the most respected person in Millfield. Sunday services were sacred, nobody dared miss them, and the festival for the patron saint, St. Mary of Grace, was the most anticipated event of the year. The whole town would be decorated, the women would make treats, the men would organize games, and the band would play in the square. It was pure joy. It was in this little town, in this environment of faith and work, that I grew up listening to stories of princesses who found their princes and lived happily ever after. My mother, while sewing the wedding dresses, would tell these stories, and I dreamed of the day when I would wear one of these dresses and find my Prince Charming. But it was also in this little town that I began to notice strange things a girl shouldn't understand so early. I remember once, I must have been about 11, when a girl named Teresa returned to town after going away to study. She was different, quiet, with a sad look. People whispered when she passed by, and my mother would pull me away when we saw her on the street. One day, I asked my mother why Teresa was so sad and why people talked about her. My mother only replied, "Some people hurt young women, Eleanor. People who should protect, but who hurt instead. When you're a young lady, never be alone with any man, even if it's someone everyone respects." I didn't really understand at the time, but I kept that advice with me. Another strange sign was the way some women looked at the ground when the pastor passed by. It wasn't just respect, it seemed like fear. And how some mothers never let their daughters go to Bible study alone. There was always a mother, an aunt, an older sister along. I thought it was just overprotection, but later I would understand that it was much more than that. Life took its course, and I grew up among my mother's wedding dresses, games with friends, school duties, and Sunday services. I dreamed of my wedding day, with the dress my mother would make for me, the church all decorated, and the young man who would wait for me at the altar. Little did I know that this dream would turn into a nightmare that would mark my life forever, but that would also bring me a strength I never imagined I had. When I turned 17, my life took a turn. My brother Oliver, who was already established as a doctor in Richmond, invited me to live with him and his wife. He said that in Charlottesville, a neighboring city where he also worked, there was a nursing technical school, and that I could study there. My parents, after much discussion, agreed. They wanted a better future for their youngest daughter. It was with a heavy heart that I left Millfield. My mother gave me a rosary as a gift and told me to pray every day and stay on God's path. My father gave me some money and a piece of advice. Trust your heart first before trusting any person, even if that person wears a clerical collar. I arrived in Charlottesville in March 1964. It was a bigger city than Millfield, with more movement, more people. In the first few days, I felt lost, missing my family, my friends, even the apple tree in the backyard. But soon, I began to adapt. The nursing course was demanding, but I enjoyed learning to care for people. It was at nursing school that I met Susan, a girl from Staunton who became my best friend. It was she who accompanied me on the way home, who helped me with my studies, who took me to get to know the city on weekends. And it was she who introduced me to her brother, Michael, on a Sunday in May during lunch at her parents' house. Michael worked at a bank, was 3 years older than me, and had the kindest eyes I'd ever seen in my life. We talked the whole Sunday, and I returned to my brother's house with butterflies in my stomach. In the following weeks, he began to visit me, always bringing a little chocolate or a little flower. My brother Oliver approved of the courtship. He said that Michael was a young man from a good family with a future. Our courtship was like a dream. He respected me, waited for me at the end of school, took me to have ice cream in the square. When we completed 6 months of dating, he gave me a little promise ring, and when it was a year, he took me to a restaurant by the river and asked for my hand in marriage. "I want to build a life with you, Eleanor," he said with those sincere eyes. "I want to have children with you, grow old by your side." How could I say no to such a request? We set the wedding for 6 months from then, enough time to organize everything, and for my mother to sew my wedding dress. Oh, my dress. My mother came from Millfield, especially to take the measurements. It was white satin, with pearl embroidery on the bodice and a train that dragged for almost 6 feet. Each pearl was sewn by hand, each detail thought out with care. My mother said she was making the most beautiful dress of her entire life. The chosen church was St. Christopher's Cathedral, the most beautiful in Charlottesville. Michael was an active member of the community, participated in youth groups, helped with church festivals. Everyone knew and respected him. The pastor of the parish, Pastor Richard Wilson was an elderly gentleman with white hair and a jovial manner. He had known Michael's family for years. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, I had to go to the church several times to sort out details of the ceremony. The first time, I went with Michael. In the following ones, as he was busy at the bank, I went alone. It was on one of these visits that I met Pastor Luke Sullivan, Pastor Richard's nephew, who had recently arrived from Boston. He was a tall man, about 40, with a deep voice and a way of looking that made me uncomfortable. He would be responsible for our ceremony, since Pastor Richard was in fragile health. I remember as if it were today the first time I was alone with Pastor Luke. I went to the vestry to deliver the list of songs we wanted in the ceremony. He closed the door and sat very close to me. "So you're Michael's bride," he said, looking at me in a way that made me want to run out of there. "Such a beautiful young woman. He's a lucky man." I thanked him awkwardly and tried to change the subject, talking about the songs. He agreed with the choices but kept looking at me in a strange way. When I got up to leave, he held my arm. "Have you confessed for the wedding?" he asked. I replied that I hadn't yet. "Come confess with me," he insisted. "I need to make sure you're pure enough for Michael." I left there with a knot in my stomach, remembering my father's advice. I told Michael about the discomfort I felt, but he minimized the situation. "Pastor Luke is highly respected," said Michael. "He studied at Harvard Divinity School, comes from an important family in the city. It must just be his manner, a bit formal because of the time he spent in Boston." I trusted Michael, but decided I wouldn't confess with Pastor Luke. Instead, I went to a neighboring parish where nobody knew me and made my confession there. I didn't tell this to anyone. I thought it was better that way. The weeks went by, and the wedding day approached. My parents arrived in Charlottesville 2 days before. My mother brought the dress, which was even more beautiful than I had imagined. The night before the wedding, we had a small gathering at Michael's parents' house. It was there that I met his mother, Mrs. Sarah Thompson. She was a quiet woman, of few words. While everyone was chatting animatedly about the next day's party, she remained silent, with a rosary between her fingers. At a certain point, she approached me and, without anyone noticing, squeezed my hand tightly. "May God protect you tomorrow, my child," she said with an expression that mixed fear and resignation. I thought it was strange, but thought it was just the nervousness of seeing her son getting married. On the morning of the wedding, I woke up with my heart racing. My friends from nursing school came to help me get ready. Susan, who would be my maid of honor, couldn't stop smiling and saying that I would be the most beautiful bride Charlottesville had ever seen. When I put on that dress that my mother had made with so much love, I looked in the mirror and could hardly believe it. It was as if a dream was coming true. The pearl embroidery shimmered in the sunlight coming through the window. The veil fell like a cascade over my shoulders. I was radiant, ready to start a new life beside the man I loved. We arrived at St. Christopher's Cathedral at 3 p.m. sharp. The car that took me, all decorated with white flowers, stopped in front of the entrance. My father helped me get out and offered his arm to lead me down the aisle. The church was packed. It seemed like half of Charlottesville was there. The white flowers adorned the pews, the organ played the wedding march, and there at the front, near the altar, was Michael, handsome in his dark suit, waiting for me with a nervous smile. When I reached the altar, my father handed my hand to Michael, and I felt that my life was about to change forever. What I didn't know was how much, nor in what way. Pastor Luke began the ceremony. His deep voice echoed through the church as he spoke about the duties of matrimony. At a certain point, he announced that we would take a break for the signing of the registers in the vestry before the final vows. That wasn't in the script we had agreed on, but since I wasn't very familiar with the procedures, I didn't question it. "The groom and the witnesses can wait here," said the pastor. "The bride must accompany me for a special moment of preparation." Michael smiled and squeezed my hand, as if encouraging me to go. My maid of honor, Susan, seemed concerned, but didn't say anything. I followed Pastor Luke to the back of the church, passing through the vestry. He walked quickly, as if in a hurry. We reached a small corridor that I had never seen before, away from the main area. "Before the final vows, we need to ensure that you are ready," he said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Here, enter this room to touch up your makeup. We don't want a bride with a shiny face in the photos, do we?" He opened a door that led to a small private bathroom, the kind that only pastors use. It was a cramped space, with a sink, a small mirror, and some hooks on the wall. I entered, thinking it would be quick, that I would just glance in the mirror and return to the altar, to my Michael. That's when I heard the sound of the door closing behind me and the click of the lock. When the door closed behind me, I heard Pastor Luke's breathing change. That man who moments before was conducting the most important ceremony of my life with a solemn voice, now breathed as if he had run a marathon. I turned slowly and saw him leaning against the door, looking at me in a way that froze my blood. "Pastor, I think we should go back. Michael and the guests are waiting," I said, trying to stay calm, while my heart was beating so hard it felt like it would come out of my mouth. "Don't rush, my child," he replied, with a smile that had nothing holy about it. "Before delivering a bride to her husband, I need to make sure she is prepared." He took a step in my direction, and I backed up until I felt the cold sink against my back. There was nowhere to go in that tiny bathroom. The smell of cologne coming from his suit mixed with a breath of wine made me nauseous. "You're scaring me," I said, my voice already trembling. "Please, let me out." That's when he raised his hand and ran his fingers over my veil, then over my face. "So beautiful, so pure. You know I can cancel this wedding with a word, don't you? I can say that you're not in condition, that you're not worthy." I felt the world spin around me. How could this be happening? In the church, on my wedding day, with a man who was supposed to be of God. I tried to control myself, to think clearly. Michael and the guests were just a few meters away in the nave of the church. If I screamed? "If you scream," he said, as if reading my thoughts, "I'll say that you had a nervous breakdown, that you're not in condition to get married today. Do you want that? Do you want your fiancé, your parents, the whole town to think that you've gone crazy?" I remained silent, paralyzed. He continued, "This won't take long. I just want to make sure that you're pure for your husband. It's an old custom, you know. God's representative needs to verify." While he spoke, he began to fiddle with the back of my dress, looking for the buttons that closed it. I felt his cold hands on my skin, and a shiver of terror ran through me. It was as if I was trapped in a nightmare, one of those where you try to scream, but your voice doesn't come out. "Please, don't do this," I begged, with tears already streaming down my face. "My father, my fiancé." "They can't help you now," he cut in, with a harsher voice. "Nobody questions a pastor in this town. Nobody." That's when I heard the first button break. Those pearl buttons that my mother had sewn with so much love, one by one. The sound of them falling on the tiled floor was like a shot in the silence of that bathroom. And then another, and one more. I can't describe in detail what happened in those minutes that seemed like an eternity. How could I translate into words the horror of being violated not only in body, but in soul, by someone who was supposed to represent the sacred? How to explain the feeling of my dream dress being torn, destroyed, while I begged a God who seemed to have abandoned me at that moment? What I can say is that while that man humiliated me with his hands and words, I transported myself to another place. In my mind, I was in the backyard of my parents' house, under the apple tree, feeling the smell of the approaching rain. It was as if my soul had fled, leaving only an empty body in that cold bathroom. "Now you are truly purified," he said when he finished, adjusting his clothes as if nothing had happened. "Empty of sin, ready for your husband." I was lying on the floor, trying to cover my body with the remains of the dress, crying silently. I couldn't even look at him. I felt disgust, shame, a despair so great that I could barely breathe. "Get dressed and return to the altar," he ordered. "If you say a word about this to anyone, I'll destroy you and your family. Nobody will believe you against a pastor. Nobody." With that, he unlocked the door and left, leaving me alone in that bathroom that would forever be the scene of my worst nightmare. I heard his footsteps moving away down the corridor, returning to the altar, as if he was going to resume the ceremony normally. I stayed there, on the floor, for a few moments that seemed like hours. How could I get out of there? How could I return to the altar, to Michael, to all those guests, in that state? My dress was destroyed, my face marked by crying, my soul in pieces. But then something inside me, perhaps the same spirit that made my mother create beauty with her hands, or my father work from sunrise to sunset to support us, gave me strength to get up. I couldn't stay there forever. I needed to get out. I needed help. With trembling hands, I tried to fix what remained of the dress. The pearl buttons were scattered on the floor. I tried to pick up some, but they slipped from my fingers, wet with tears. The bodice was torn at the back, the skirt wrinkled. The veil had been torn off and thrown in the corner. I looked in the small mirror above the sink. My face was unrecognizable. The lipstick smeared, the eyes red and swollen, the makeup that the girls had done with so much care, completely ruined. I put a little water on my face, trying to improve my appearance, but it was useless. There was no way to hide what had happened. At that moment, I heard a noise coming from the church. It was the organ playing again. Pastor Luke must have returned to the altar and restarted the ceremony as if nothing had happened. He probably told everyone that I was getting ready, touching up my makeup, having a moment of prayer before the final vows. And they would believe him, of course. Why wouldn't they believe the pastor? It was then that I made a decision. I couldn't return to the altar like that, but I also couldn't stay hidden there forever. I needed help. I needed to tell what had happened, even if nobody believed it, even if it meant the end of my wedding, of my reputation, of my life as I knew it. I took a deep breath, held the remains of the dress as best I could to cover my body, and opened the bathroom door. The corridor was deserted, which was a relief. I could hear, in the distance, Pastor Luke's voice in the church, speaking into the microphone, probably inventing some excuse for my delay. I walked slowly down the corridor, trying to think of what to do. If I entered the church from the back, everyone would see me in that state. If I tried to leave through the side door, I might meet someone on the way. I had no option. I needed to pass through the vestry and find help. When I reached the vestry door, I stopped. On the other side was the church full of people, Michael waiting, my parents, the guests, and him. How could I face them? How would I explain what had happened? It was in this moment of total despair that I felt a hand touch my shoulder. I turned, startled, ready to defend myself. It was Susan, my maid of honor, my friend. "Eleanor, my God in heaven, what happened to you?" she exclaimed, bringing her hands to her mouth upon seeing the state I was in. "Susan," was all I managed to say before collapsing in tears in her arms. "It was him, wasn't it?" she asked, with a voice that mixed horror and an understanding that surprised me. "It was Pastor Luke. He hurt you?" I nodded, unable to put into words what had happened. Susan hugged me tightly, then moved away and looked into my eyes. "Listen, Eleanor, you're not the first. I've heard stories, but never thought he would do this on your wedding day, in the church." I was shocked. Not the first? There were others? Why didn't anyone say anything? Why didn't anyone do anything? "What do I do now, Susan?" I asked, desperate. "I can't go back there like this. I can't face everyone." Michael needs to know," she said firmly. "My brother loves you. He'll stand by your side. But we can't expose you like this. Come, let's go out through the side door. My car is outside." "But the ceremony, the guests, that doesn't matter now, Eleanor. Your safety and your well-being are more important than any ceremony. She took off the jacket she was wearing over her maid of honor dress and put it around my shoulders, trying to cover as much as possible of the damage to my dress. "Come, let's go out this way." We started walking towards the side door of the vestry. It was a small exit, used mainly by the altar boys and church staff. If we could reach it without being seen, perhaps we would have a chance. But when we were about to reach the door, I heard a noise. It was the main door of the vestry opening. I turned and saw Pastor Luke standing in the doorway. His face contorted into an expression of anger when he saw us. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked, with a controlled voice but full of threat. "The ceremony isn't over. The bride needs to return to the altar." Susan positioned herself in front of me like a shield. "She's not going anywhere with you." "Look what you did to her, you monster!" The pastor took a step in our direction. His eyes were dark, like bottomless wells. "Be careful what you say, young lady. You're accusing a man of God. That's a serious sin." "The serious sin is what you just did," Susan replied, not backing down. "And don't think this is going to be left like this. We're going to tell everyone." The pastor laughed, a cold sound without humor. "And who will believe you? A hysterical bride and her friend? Against the word of a pastor respected by the whole town?" He was right, and that destroyed me inside. Who would believe us? How would we prove what had happened in that bathroom? It was our word against his, and in the hierarchy of credibility, we were far below. "Michael will believe," said Susan, but her voice no longer had the same conviction. "Ah, yes, your brother." The pastor smiled again. "The devout Michael, who grew up respecting the church and its representatives. He's going to believe that the man who baptized him, who gave him his first communion, who heard his confessions throughout his life, abused his bride? Or will he think that she panicked, tore her own dress in a nervous breakdown, and made up this story to hide her madness?" Each word of his was like a knife, because deep down I knew he might be right. Michael was a good man, but he was also a man of unwavering faith. How would he react to such an accusation against a pastor? Would he believe me, or would he think I had gone crazy? "Now be reasonable," continued Pastor Luke in a more conciliatory tone. "Let's forget this little incident. The bride had a moment of nervousness, tore the dress, but nothing we can't fix. We'll say it was an accident. We can continue the ceremony, and nobody needs to know what really happened here." "Never," I replied, finding my voice for the first time since he entered the vestry. "I will never let you get near me again." He narrowed his eyes, all the false kindness disappearing. "Then you're choosing the hard way. Think carefully, Eleanor. Think about the scandal, the shame for your family, for Michael. Think about what people will say when they know that the bride had a nervous breakdown on the wedding day and made up accusations against the pastor." At that moment, I heard another door open. It was the door that led directly to the church, and there, standing with an expression of confusion that soon turned into horror, was Michael. "Eleanor," he said, looking at me, at the state of my dress, at the tears on my face. "My God, what happened to you?" Time seemed to freeze when Michael entered the vestry. His eyes scanned my torn dress, my face marked by tears, the despair etched in every inch of my being. I saw the confusion in his look, then the concern, and finally, something I had never seen before, a deep, primal anger. "What happened here?" he asked, his voice low and controlled, but trembling slightly. His eyes went from me to Pastor Luke and back to me. Before I could answer, the pastor stepped forward, assuming that paternal and concerned posture that I already knew all too well. "Michael, my son," he began, "your bride is having a difficult moment. A nervous breakdown, understandable on the wedding day. She tore her own dress and was trying to flee from the church. Your sister and I were trying to calm her down." Michael looked at Susan, who immediately shook her head. "That's a lie," she said firmly. "Michael, don't believe him." The pastor sighed, as if he was dealing with stubborn children. You see, the bride is clearly disturbed, and your sister is just trying to protect her. But I think we need to call a doctor, perhaps postpone the ceremony." "He hurt me, Michael," I finally managed to say, my voice almost a whisper. "He took me to a bathroom at the back of the church. He said he needed to purify me before the vows. He tore my dress. He touched me." I couldn't continue. The words got stuck in my throat, suffocated by the shame and horror of the still so recent memory. Michael's face turned pale, but the pastor was quick to respond. "See? Delusions, absurd accusations from a panicking mind," he said, now with indignation in his voice. "Michael, you've known me since you were a boy. I baptized you, gave you your first communion. How can you believe that I would be capable of something so repugnant?" I saw the doubt on my fiancé's face. The pastor was a respected man, a figure of spiritual authority in his life. And me? I was just a girl who came from another town, whom he had known for just over a year. "Michael, please," I begged, extending my hand to him. "I would never lie about something like this. Why would I want to ruin our wedding? Why would I destroy the dress that my mother made with so much love? I was so happy this morning." Michael looked at my outstretched hand, then at the pastor, and then back at me. I could see the battle happening inside him, the faith of a lifetime against his love for me. That's when the pastor decided to deliver the final blow. "Michael, I understand your confusion, but think, we have witnesses. People in the church saw the bride enter with me into the vestry for the signing of the documents, perfectly normal and calm. What happened afterward? Only God knows what went through her mind. Perhaps the stress, perhaps a more serious problem." He lowered his voice as if confiding something. "You know, I heard rumors about her family. Her mother has problems, imbalances. These things are sometimes hereditary." That was like a slap in the face. He was insinuating that my mother, my sweet and talented mother, was crazy, and that I had inherited this madness. The audacity of that man had no limits. "That's a lie," I screamed, with a strength that I didn't know I still had. "My mother is the sanest and kindest woman in the world. You don't know her. You have no right to talk about her like that." The pastor smiled, as if my outburst only proved his point. "See how agitated she gets, Michael? That's what I'm talking about. Emotional instability." That's when Susan, who until then was by my side, stepped forward and faced her brother. "Michael, look at me. Look into my eyes and tell me, do you really think Eleanor would be capable of making something like this up? Of tearing her own wedding dress? Of ruining the day she dreamed of her whole life?" Michael looked at his sister, then at me, and then at the pastor. I could see the internal struggle, the pain of the impossible decision. "And there's more," continued Susan, now looking directly at the pastor. "She's not the first, Michael. I've heard stories about Pastor Luke, whispers, rumors that nobody has the courage to speak out loud. Why do you think so many girls refuse to confess with him? Why do so many mothers not let their daughters go alone to Bible study?" The pastor's expression changed. The confident smile gave way to something harder, more threatening. "Be careful what you say, girl. Defamation is a serious sin, and it's also a crime." "It's not defamation if it's the truth," Susan replied, not retreating an inch. The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with tension. Michael was motionless, like a statue, looking from the pastor to me and to his sister. It was then that we heard a noise coming from the church. People were getting restless with the delay. Someone called Michael's name, probably one of the groomsmen coming to check what was happening. The pastor took advantage of the opportunity. "We need to resolve this now. The guests are waiting. Michael, what will it be? Shall we continue the ceremony, or—" He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. It was a choice between proceeding with the wedding, pretending that nothing had happened, or believing me and facing the consequences, the scandal, the accusations, the disbelief of the community. Michael finally moved. He took a step in my direction, hesitated, then took another. My heart was racing. This was the moment of truth. Would he believe me or the pastor? When he got close enough, he extended his hand and gently touched my face, where a red mark was beginning to appear, a result of the force with which the pastor had held my face when I tried to resist. "I know you, Eleanor," he said softly. "I know your heart. You wouldn't lie about something like this." The tears I had been holding finally overflowed. The relief of being believed, of not being abandoned, was overwhelming. Michael turned to the pastor, and his expression changed completely. The gentle and respectful man I knew gave way to someone I had never seen before, someone with fury in his eyes and determination on his face. "If you touched her," he said, with a voice I barely recognized, "if you did a tenth of what she's saying, I swear to God I'll—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The threat was clear in every syllable, in every tense muscle of his body. The pastor took a step back, for the first time seeming insecure. "Think carefully about what you're doing, Michael. Think of your family, your position in the community. Who will believe you? Who will stand against the church?" It was at this moment that the vestry door opened again. I thought it would be one of the groomsmen, or perhaps my father, coming to look for us. But it wasn't. It was Mrs. Sarah Thompson, Michael's mother. She entered silently, as she always did, with her rosary in her hands, and that expression that I now recognized not as resignation, but as a deep and old suffering. "What's happening here?" she asked, with a surprisingly firm voice for a woman who rarely spoke above a whisper. Her eyes scanned the scene. Me with the torn dress, Michael with fury stamped on his face, Susan by my side, the pastor cornered against the wall. "Mother," Michael began, "you need to leave here. We're resolving a problem." "What problem could be so serious as to interrupt a wedding?" she asked, looking directly at me. There was no judgment in her look, only a deep and disturbing understanding. The pastor," I tried to explain, but the words failed me again. "Mrs. Sarah," Pastor Luke quickly intervened, "your future daughter-in-law is having a nervous breakdown. She made absurd accusations against me. Your son, unfortunately, seems inclined to believe her. Perhaps you, with your wisdom, can help him see reason." Michael's mother looked long at the pastor. Her face, normally expressionless, began to change. I saw something emerge in those tired eyes, a spark, a fire that must have been dormant for decades. "Absurd accusations?" she repeated slowly. "What kind of accusations, Pastor?" "She says he took her to a bathroom at the back of the church," Susan explained quickly. "That he tore her dress and hurt her." "Mrs." Sarah remained motionless for a long moment. Then, to my complete astonishment, she nodded slightly. "Yes," she said, with a voice that seemed to come from very far away. "The bathroom at the back. I know it." The pastor visibly paled. "Mrs. Sarah, please, you cannot—" "Yes, I can," she interrupted him, with a firmness that seemed impossible coming from that fragile and quiet woman. "I can, and I will. I've been silent for too long." She turned to her son. "Michael, I believe her. Because this man's father did the same thing in my time." A stunning silence fell over the vestry. Mrs. Sarah's revelation was like a lightning bolt that illuminated a landscape long shrouded in darkness. "Mother?" Michael whispered, shocked. "What are you talking about?" Mrs. Sarah looked directly at Pastor Luke, without fear, without hesitation. "Your father, the old Pastor Sullivan, did the same thing to brides, in the same bathroom, with the same words about purification. I know because I was one of them. On the day of my wedding to your father." She turned to Michael. "I never told anyone, not even your father. I carried this shame alone for 30 years. I remained silent. I prayed. I asked God to truly purify me, and I swore I would protect other women. But I failed. I failed because I was afraid, because no one would believe me against a man of God. Silent tears streamed down Mrs. Sarah's wrinkled face. Michael was in shock, completely speechless. Susan had her hands over her mouth, horrified, and I felt a mixture of horror at the revelation and a strange comfort for not being alone, for being believed. Pastor Luke seemed to have shrunk. The arrogance, the confidence that he would get away with it as he always had, all of this had disappeared from his face. "Lie," he said, but his voice trembled. "All lies. You have no proof." "We don't need proof," Mrs. Sarah replied with surprising calm. "We just need the courage to speak the truth, and I've found mine, finally." It was at this moment that we heard more voices approaching. The vestry door opened again, and this time it was my father, accompanied by Michael's father and some guests. "What's happening here?" my father asked, concerned. Then his eyes landed on me, on the state of my dress, on my face marked by tears. "My daughter, what did they do to you?" Pastor Luke tried one last time. "She had a nervous breakdown, sir. She tore her own dress and is making absurd accusations." "Shut up!" shouted Michael, advancing a step in the pastor's direction. "Don't dare speak that way about my bride." My father ran to me, took off his jacket and put it over my shoulders, trying to cover me, to protect me, although it was too late for that. "Who did this to you, daughter?" he asked, with a voice trembling with anger and concern. I looked at the pastor, then at Michael, at Susan, at Mrs. Sarah. Suddenly I felt stronger, less alone. Perhaps it was possible to speak the truth and be heard. Perhaps it was possible to break the cycle of silence and shame. "It was him, Dad," I answered, pointing to Pastor Luke. "He took me to a bathroom at the back of the church. He tore my dress. He hurt me." My father looked at the pastor, and I saw in his eyes a fury that I had never witnessed before. I remembered what he told me before I left Millfield. Trust your heart first before trusting any person, even if that person wears a clerical collar. He knew. Somehow, he knew of the dangers. He began, taking a step in the direction of the pastor. What happened next was so fast that I barely had time to process. Michael, who was closer, didn't wait. With a movement that no one predicted, he advanced against Pastor Luke and hit him with a punch to the face. The pastor staggered backward, hitting against the vestry wall, an expression of absolute shock on his face. "Michael!" shouted his father, running to hold his son before he delivered another blow. "What are you doing? He's a pastor!" "He's a monster!" shouted Michael, fighting against his father's grip. "Ask my mother. Ask her what this man's father did to brides." Michael's father looked stupefied, passing his gaze from his son to his wife. "Sarah, what is he talking about? What story is this?" Mrs. Sarah was upright now, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She walked until she stood next to her son and put a hand on his shoulder. "It's true, George," she said to her husband. "This man's father, the old Pastor Sullivan, did to me the same thing that his son just did to this poor girl. On the day of our wedding, 30 years ago, he took me to the same bathroom, spoke the same words about purification. And I never had the courage to tell you. I never had the courage to tell anyone." The room fell into a heavy silence. Mr. George looked at his wife as if he was seeing a stranger. "Why did you never tell me anything, Sarah? For all these years?" "Shame," she replied, her voice trembling a little. "Fear. Who would believe me? He was the most respected pastor in the diocese. And each time I needed to go to church, each time we needed to participate in some ceremony, there he was, with that smile, reminding me of my silence, of my secret." Mrs. Sarah then turned to Pastor Luke, and her voice gained an impressive firmness. "When your father died, Luke, I thought that nightmare had ended, that other girls would be safe. But then you returned from Boston to take his place. And the first time I saw you looking at a young woman, I recognized that same look. The same eyes as your father. And I knew you were just like him. Pastor Luke seemed to have aged 10 years in the last few minutes. His arrogance had completely disappeared, replaced by a growing panic as more people entered the vestry, attracted by the commotion. "This woman is crazy," he said, but his voice no longer had the firmness of before. "All this is a conspiracy against me, against the church." "No, it's not," said another voice coming from the vestry door. Everyone turned and saw an elderly lady leaning on a cane whom I recognized as Mrs. Martha, the church organist. "I went through it too," she continued, looking directly at Mrs. Sarah. "At my wedding, in 1942, with old Pastor Sullivan. That's why I never had children, because after that day, I never again wanted any man to touch me, not even my husband." A murmur ran through the vestry, which was now full of people. Another woman, younger, stepped forward. "3 years ago," she said, "at my pre-wedding confession, with Pastor Luke." And then it was as if a dam had broken. More voices, more stories, more courage found in the testimony of others. Years and years of silence, shame, and pain finally being exposed to the light. Pastor Luke backed up to the wall, his eyes wide like a cornered animal. "This is a nightmare," he muttered. "This can't be happening." Amid the tumult, I felt Michael's hand holding mine. He gently pulled me out of that circle of people to a calmer corner of the vestry. "Eleanor," he said, looking directly into my eyes, "forgive me. Forgive me for having hesitated, even if for a second. Forgive me for not having protected you." I shook my head, unable to speak. There was nothing to forgive. He had believed in me when it would have been much easier not to believe, when all the weight of tradition and authority was against me. "Do you still want to marry me?" he asked, with a voice so soft that I could barely hear in the midst of the confusion forming in the vestry. "Not today, of course. Not here. But someday, when you're ready. If you still want to." I looked at that man, at the love and concern in his eyes, and felt something breaking inside me. It wasn't my heart. That was already broken by what had just happened. It was the fear, the shame, the feeling that I was dirty, that no one would accept me after what had happened. All of this dissolved before that look. "Yes," I answered, surprised by the firmness of my own voice. "Yes, I still want to marry you, Michael." He smiled, a sad smile but full of promise, and hugged me carefully, as if I were made of porcelain. My father approached us, his face a mask of pain and concern. "Let's go home, daughter," he said. "Your mother is waiting outside, worried. We need to take care of you." I nodded, allowing them to guide me out of the vestry, away from that chaotic scene, away from Pastor Luke and the memories of what had happened in the bathroom. My father's jacket still covered my shoulders, hiding the damage to my wedding dress, but nothing could hide the damage to my soul. When we passed through the door that led to the nave of the church, I saw that it was almost empty. Most of the guests had already gone or were crowded at the entrance to the vestry, trying to understand what was happening. The few who remained in the pews looked at me with expressions that ranged from curiosity to pity. My mother ran to meet us, her face marked by tears. "My daughter!" she exclaimed, enveloping me in a tight hug. "What happened? Why did the ceremony stop? Why are you wearing your father's jacket?" I couldn't answer. The words got stuck in my throat. How to explain to my mother the horror I had lived, how to stain her ears with that story. It was Michael who spoke, with a controlled voice but loaded with emotion. "Mrs. Alice, there was an incident. Eleanor was attacked by the pastor." My mother turned pale, a hand going to her mouth. "No," she whispered. "No, it can't be." "It's true, Mom," I finally managed to say. "He took me to a bathroom at the back of the church. He tore my dress. I couldn't finish, but it wasn't necessary. My mother understood, and I saw in her eyes the same pain that I felt in my heart. She hugged me again, stronger this time, as if she wanted to protect me retroactively, to erase what had happened. "Let's go home," she said firmly. "Right now." And so, surrounded by those who truly loved me, my parents, Michael, Susan, I left St. Christopher's Cathedral that Saturday afternoon. Not as a happy bride, arm in arm with her husband, under a shower of rice and blessings, but as a survivor, carrying a wound that would take time to heal, but also a strength that I didn't know I had. What I couldn't imagine at that moment, as I entered my father's car and looked for the last time at the church where my dream had turned into a nightmare, was that that day marked not only the end of an innocence, but also the beginning of a silent revolution in Charlottesville. A revolution led by women who, like Mrs. Sarah, Mrs. Martha, and so many others, had kept their secrets for too long and now, finally, found their voices. In the days that followed that fateful Saturday, I locked myself in the room I occupied in my brother Oliver's house. I didn't want to see anyone. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I felt shame, disgust, anger, a whirlwind of emotions that consumed me from within. My mother stayed in Charlottesville to take care of me, sitting beside my bed, trying to convince me to eat, to drink water, to take a bath. But I could barely move. "Daughter," she would say, running her hand through my hair as she did when I was a child. "What happened to you was terrible, but it wasn't your fault. You did nothing wrong." I knew this, deep in my soul, but the rational knowledge didn't alleviate the pain, the feeling of violation that seemed impregnated in my skin. No matter how much I scrubbed, no matter how much I tried to forget, the memory of those hands, that voice, that cold bathroom haunted me. Michael came every day, but I refused to see him. Not because I was angry with him. I never was. He had believed in me. He had defended me. But I couldn't face him. How could I look into the eyes of the man I loved after what had happened? How could I be his wife, his companion, when I felt so broken? It was Susan who finally managed to get me out of that state. On the 4th day after the incident, she entered my room without asking permission, opened the curtains, letting the sunlight enter for the first time in days, and sat on the edge of my bed. "Eleanor," she said, with that frankness that was so characteristic of her, "I know you're suffering, and you have every right to suffer. But there's something happening in the city that you need to know." I turned my back to her, pulling the blanket over my head. I didn't want to know anything that was happening in the city. I just wanted to disappear, to hide from the world forever. "Pastor Luke has been removed," she continued, ignoring my attempt to isolate myself. "The bishop of the diocese came personally from Richmond when he heard what happened. There was an internal investigation, and he was sent to a spiritual retreat, which is what they call it when they want to hide a pastor who caused problems." This caught my attention. I sat up in bed, still wrapped in the blanket, looking at Susan for the first time in days. "They removed him?" I asked, my voice hoarse from so much crying and little use. "But how? Why? I thought nobody would believe." "That's just it," Susan smiled, a sad smile but full of a kind of satisfaction. "After what happened in the vestry, after Mrs. Sarah spoke, it was like a floodgate had opened. More than 20 women from Charlottesville came forward. 20, Eleanor. Some suffered abuse from Pastor Luke, others from his father. Some were brides, like you and Mrs. Sarah. Others were just girls in Bible study." I remained silent, processing the information. 20 women, 20 lives marked by the same kind of horror that I had lived. The idea was at the same time devastating and somehow comforting. I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only one. It wasn't because there was something wrong with me, something that provoked that violence. "The bishop tried to cover up the case, of course," continued Susan. "He talked about discretion, about protecting the reputation of the church. But Mrs. Sarah didn't let him. You know what she did? She went to the Charlottesville Gazette and told everything. Everything. Your name appeared in the newspaper, Eleanor, as the bride who was abused by the pastor on her wedding day. I felt a shiver run down my spine. My name in the newspaper. My story exposed for all to read, for all to know. But why? Why would she do that? I asked, feeling a mixture of horror and something approaching admiration. Because she said she was tired of secrets, Susan replied. Tired of silence, tired of protecting men who don't deserve protection. And you know what happened after the article came out? The mayor was pressured to speak out. The police were forced to open an investigation. And other women, from other cities, began to tell similar stories about other pastors. I remained silent again, trying to absorb what she was telling me. It was as if a small revolution was happening in Charlottesville, a revolution triggered by the horror I experienced in that vestry. And there's more, said Susan, taking my hand. Michael's mother is organizing a support group for women who went through what you went through, what she went through. A safe place to talk, to share, to heal. She wants you to participate when you're ready. I looked at our joined hands, at Susan's fingers intertwined with mine. For the first time in days, I felt something beyond shame and pain. I felt a small spark of hope, of purpose. And Michael? I asked, finally giving voice to the question that tormented me. How is he? Susan's face softened. He's suffering for you, Eleanor. He loves you so much. He wants to see you, wants to help you, but respects your space, your time. He said he'll wait as long as necessary, that he's not in a hurry. Tears began to stream down my face, but they were different from the tears of recent days. They weren't tears of despair, of shame. They were tears of relief, of gratitude. I want to see him, I said, surprising myself with the sudden decision. Not today. I'm still not presentable. But tomorrow. Can you tell him to come tomorrow? Susan smiled, squeezing my hand. Of course I can. He'll be so happy, Eleanor. That night, for the first time since the incident, I agreed to have dinner with my mother and my brother in the dining room instead of eating alone in the bedroom. I was far from being well, far from being cured. But something had begun to change within me. The idea that my pain, my horrible experience, had somehow triggered a larger movement that could help other women gave me a kind of strength that I didn't know I needed. The next day, I took a long shower, letting the hot water wash not only the dirt from my body, but also, symbolically, a bit of the shame that had consumed me. I put on a simple but clean outfit. I combed my hair, looked in the mirror. The woman who looked back at me was pale, with deep, dark circles, thinner than a week ago. But her eyes had a gleam that wasn't there before, a gleam of determination, of newly discovered strength. When Michael arrived, he was nervous, insecure, clearly worried about saying or doing something wrong. We sat in the living room, with my mother discreetly present in the kitchen, giving us privacy, but maintaining the propriety that the customs of the time required. How are you? He asked, sitting on the edge of the sofa, as if he was ready to flee at the slightest sign that his presence bothered me. I'm surviving, I answered honestly. One day at a time. He nodded, his eyes never leaving mine. Susan told me about the group that my mother is organizing, about the newspaper, the police investigation. Yes, I said, feeling a warmth in my chest when thinking of Mrs. Sarah, that quiet woman who had found her voice in such a powerful way. Your mother is amazing, Michael. She is, he agreed, a small smile appearing on his face. I've never seen her like this, you know? So strong, so determined. It's as if she had awakened from a long sleep. My father is scared, he laughed, a genuine laugh that lit a small flame within me. He said he married one woman and now is living with another. I laughed too, a strange sound after so many days of tears. I hope he's enjoying the new version. He's loving it, Michael answered, his eyes shining. He says he fell in love with her again. We remained silent for a moment, a comfortable silence, different from the oppressive silence that had enveloped me in recent days. "And us, Eleanor?" Michael finally asked, his voice low, careful. "What happens with us now?" I took a deep breath, thinking about the answer. A week ago, I was preparing to become this man's wife. Now, everything had changed. I had changed. "I don't know, Michael," I answered honestly. "I don't know if I can be the wife you deserve, that you expected to have. I don't know if I'll ever completely overcome what happened. But I know that I still love you. That hasn't changed." He extended his hand slowly, giving me time to retreat if I wanted to. I didn't retreat. I let him take my hand, let him intertwine his fingers with mine, just as Susan had done the day before. "I'm not in a hurry," he said, with a firmness that surprised me. "We can wait. A month, a year, the time you need. And when, if, you decide you're ready, it won't be in the church. It will be your way, where you feel safe." Tears appeared in my eyes again. How could I be so lucky in the midst of so much misfortune? How could I have found a man like this, who understood, who respected, who would wait? "Thank you," was all I managed to say. The weeks that followed were an emotional roller coaster. The police investigation continued, with more women coming forward each day to give testimony. The case gained repercussion beyond Charlottesville, appearing in the newspapers of Richmond, then of Washington, D.C., of New York. Journalists came to the city, wanting interviews, photos, stories. I refused all interviews initially. I wasn't ready to speak publicly about what had happened. But I participated in the support group organized by Mrs. Sarah. Hearing the stories of other women, some older than my mother, others younger than me, was at the same time devastating and healing. There was so much suffering in that room, so much pain kept for so long. But there was also an impressive strength, a resilience that inspired me every day. It was in one of these meetings that I met Rachel, a journalist from Roanoke who had come to cover the case. Unlike the other journalists, she wasn't interested only in the sordid details. She wanted to understand the movement that was being born, the impact on women, on the community. She herself had a story of abuse to share, although it didn't involve the church. "What you're doing here is revolutionary," she told me one day, after a meeting of the group. "You're challenging not just some pastors, but an entire system that protects abusers, that silences victims." "I don't feel like a revolutionary," I replied, with a small smile. "I just feel like someone trying to survive, trying to make sense of what happened." "Sometimes that's how revolutions begin," she said, with a seriousness that made me reflect. "With ordinary people trying to survive, trying to make sense of their suffering." It was Rachel who convinced me to finally tell my story, not to seek the spotlight or fame, but to help other women who might be going through the same thing. To show that it was possible to survive, that it was possible to speak, that it was possible to find support. The article she wrote, published first in the Roanoke Times and then reproduced in other vehicles across the country, didn't mention just the horror of what had happened in the church bathroom. It also talked about the support group, about Mrs. Sarah's courage, about the movement that was growing not only in Charlottesville, but in other cities, as more women found the courage to speak. 6 months after the incident, the police investigation was concluded. Pastor Luke was indicted for crimes against me and against 12 other women who had the courage to give formal testimony. His father, already deceased, couldn't be judged, but his name was stained forever, his memory unmasked. The church tried everything to cover up the case, to protect its image. It offered financial compensation to the victims in exchange for silence, tried to transfer Pastor Luke to another parish instead of handing him over to justice, went so far as to suggest that all those women were lying, making up stories for revenge or to gain notoriety. But it was too late. The truth had already come to light, and there was no way to put it back in the box. Pastor Luke ended up being tried and convicted, although the penalty was lighter than many of us would have liked. The church was forced to acknowledge the abuses, to offer formal apologies, to promise changes in protection policies. In the meantime, Michael and I continued together, although not married. He waited, patient, loving, never pressuring me. We worked together in the movement that was being born, he being one of the few male voices to rise in defense of women, to believe in the stories, to demand justice. A year after the day that should have been our wedding, he proposed to me again. We were by the banks of the Rivanna River, the same place where he had proposed to me the first time. But we were different people now. Stronger, more aware, more committed not only to each other, but to the fight for justice that had become part of our lives. "Do you still want to marry me, Eleanor Jenkins?" he asked, holding my hands in his. I looked at him, at the man who had been by my side in the most difficult moments, who had believed in me when it would have been easier not to believe, who had waited patiently while I struggled to find my strength again. "Yes," I answered without hesitation. "Yes, Michael, I want to marry you." We got married in a simple ceremony, in the backyard of Michael's parents' house. There was no church, no pastor. It was a justice of the peace who conducted the ceremony under an arch of flowers that Susan and my friends from the support group had prepared. My mother made a new dress for me, not white and pompous like the first, but a simple dress, light blue, which she said matched the color of hope. Mrs. Sarah was my matron of honor, a symbolic gesture that meant a lot to both of us. She was no longer the quiet and resigned woman that I had met a year before. She was a leader, a powerful voice for women who had long been silenced. When the justice of the peace declared us husband and wife, and Michael softly kissed me on the lips, I felt a wave of gratitude so intense that it almost knocked me down. Gratitude not for what had happened. I would never feel gratitude for that horror, but for the strength I had found afterward, for the people who had supported me, for the movement that had been born from my pain. 3 months after our wedding, Michael was transferred by the bank to a branch in Seabreeze, on the coast of North Carolina. It was a difficult decision to leave Charlottesville, to leave the support group, the movement that had become so important to me. But it was also a relief, a chance to start again, away from the memories, away from the looks of pity, away from the church where everything had happened. Before we left, I had a final meeting with the support group. Women who had become my friends, my sisters in pain and in healing. "I'm not abandoning you," I said, with tears in my eyes. "I'm not abandoning the fight. I just need this new beginning." "You deserve it, Eleanor," replied Mrs. Sarah, hugging me tightly. "You've given so much of yourself to all of us. Now it's time to live your life, to be happy. And I'll continue the fight in Seabreeze, I promised. I'll take what I learned here, what we built together. I'll help other women there, just as you helped me here." And that's what I did. Upon arriving in Seabreeze, a small and peaceful city by the sea, I found a new purpose. With Michael's support, I created a support group similar to the one in Charlottesville. In the beginning, we were just 3 or 4 women, meeting in the living room of my house. But with time, the group grew. The stories were different. Not all involved the church, but the pain, the need to speak, to be heard, to find support, were the same. The movement that had begun in a vestry in Charlottesville, with the courage of a humiliated bride and the long-silenced voice of a mother-in-law, continued to grow, to expand, to touch more lives. And I, who had felt so broken, so destroyed in that cold bathroom, found in shared pain, in collective struggle, a strength that I never knew I had. Today, almost 60 years after that day at St. Christopher's Cathedral, I live a peaceful life here in Seabreeze. Our house is a few blocks from the beach. A simple little house, painted light blue, with a porch where I spend most mornings, sitting in my rocking chair, listening to the sound of the sea and the singing of birds. Michael and I had a good life together. It wasn't perfect, no life is, but it was full of love, respect, companionship. He worked at the bank until he retired, almost 20 years ago. I, after overcoming the initial trauma, went back to study nursing and worked at the small-town hospital for more than 3 decades. It was a job that gave me purpose, that allowed me to help people in their moments of vulnerability, something that became very important to me after what I lived through. We had 2 children, Henry, who is now 56 years old and is a doctor in Wilmington, and Clara, 53, who is a teacher right here in Seabreeze. Raising them was one of the greatest joys of my life, although it was also a challenge. It took me years to completely overcome the fear of touch, to feel comfortable in intimacy. Michael was patient, caring, never pressured me. It was a slow process of healing, of rediscovery of my own body, not as an object of shame, but as a source of strength and eventually pleasure. Our children grew up knowing our story. Not the sordid details, of course, but the essence of what happened and how we transformed that pain into something positive, into a movement that helped other women. I think this shaped who they became. Henry is known for his work with women victims of violence. Clara founded a program of sex education and abuse prevention in the schools where she teaches. I have 6 wonderful grandchildren who fill my house with noise and joy when they come to visit us. The oldest, Henry's son, is already in law school. The youngest, Clara's daughter, is only 8 years old and is the joy of my days. She loves to sit with me on the porch, listening to stories from the old times, as she says. Sometimes I ask her to get my photo album, and together we look at the images that tell the story of our family. There is one photo in particular that always moves me, a black and white photograph of my wedding to Michael. I'm not in white, but in light blue. We are under the flower arch in his parents' backyard, surrounded by people who loved us. The smile on my face is small, still hesitant, but genuine. It was the smile of someone who was beginning to believe in the possibility of happiness again. "Why aren't you in white, Grandma?" little Beatrice sometimes asks me. "All brides wear white." "Not all of them, my love," I reply, caressing her hair. "Some brides choose other colors, colors that have special meaning for them. Of course, one day when she's older, I'll tell her the true story. Like her grandmothers before her, she will grow up knowing about the abuse, about the silence, about the courage needed to speak. It's a heavy knowledge to pass on, but it's also a shield, an armor to protect her in a world that isn't always kind to women. The support group that I started here in Seabreeze still exists, although it has evolved over the years. Today, it's a formal organization with volunteer professionals, psychologists, social workers, lawyers, offering help to women victims of various types of violence. I'm no longer actively involved in the administration. I pass that torch to younger women with more energy. But I still participate in the meetings when I can, still offer my story, my experience. Michael passed away 5 years ago. It was a loss that almost destroyed me again, after more than 50 years together. He left peacefully, during sleep, without suffering. A blessing. In the last years of his life, I used to wake up in the middle of the night and stay watching his breathing, fearing the moment that I knew would eventually come. When it finally happened, even being prepared, I felt as if a part of me had been torn out. But life goes on, doesn't it? I learned that in the hardest way, back in that cold bathroom of St. Christopher's Cathedral, so many years ago. I learned that no matter how bad the pain is, how deep the wound is, there is a tomorrow. And in that tomorrow, we can choose to remain victims or become survivors. We can choose silence or find our voice. I have regular contact with Mrs. Sarah, who is now 97 years old and still lives in Charlottesville, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. We talk on the phone every week, and with each conversation, I marvel at the strength of that woman who was once so quiet, so faded, and who found her voice and her power at the moment I needed it most. Susan also remained a constant presence in my life. After all these years, she is still my best friend, my confidant. She lives in Raleigh now, is a widow like me, and we're planning a trip together to the West Coast next month, our first big adventure without our husbands. The movement that began in that vestry in Charlottesville grew, expanded, and transformed over the decades. Today there are support groups like ours in hundreds of cities across America. Laws were created, policies were implemented, society evolved in its understanding and treatment of sexual abuse. Not as much as we would like, of course. There's still much to be done, much to be changed. But looking back, to the young 18-year-old bride whose dress was torn and whose life was turned upside down in that cold bathroom, I feel immense pride in the path traveled. Every day, when the sun begins to set over the sea of sea breeze, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, I think about how blessed I am. Blessed not by what happened. I will never feel gratitude for that horror, but for having survived, for having found strength to continue, for having transformed my pain into something greater than myself. And every day before sleeping, I look at Michael's portrait on my bedside table and thank him for having believed in me when the whole world was against me, for having given me time and space to heal, for having been the gentle and loving companion that he was for more than 5 decades. Good night, my love, I whisper to the portrait as I did when he was alive. And sometimes, in the moments between sleep and wakefulness, I can almost hear his response. Good night, my Eleanor. Rest well. Tomorrow will be a new day. And it is always a new day, isn't it? A new day to remember, to honor, to fight, to love, to live. A new day to be not just a survivor, but a complete woman, in all her strength and vulnerability. A woman who knew the worst of humanity, but also the best. A woman who lost much, but gained even more. A woman who, despite everything, never lost the capacity to love, to trust, to believe. That's who I am today, Eleanor Jenkins Thompson, 78 years old, widow, mother, grandmother, friend, counselor. A woman who knew hell and came back to tell the story. A woman who transformed her greatest shame into her greatest strength. A woman who, looking back on a long and full life, can say with certainty, it was worth it. Every tear, every struggle, every victory, it was worth it. My dears, I've shared with you one of the most difficult parts of my life. It's not easy to revisit these memories, but I believe that our scars, when shown in the light, help others find courage. If you're going through something similar, know this. It's not your fault. The shame doesn't belong to you, but to the aggressor. You are not alone. There are more people like you than you imagine, and together you can find strength. Healing is possible. I won't lie. It's not easy, it's not quick, but the wound that once bled constantly is today just a scar. Your voice is powerful. Abuse thrives in the shadows. Bringing it to light is the first step toward liberation. And remember, you deserve love, even with your wounds and fears. The greatest revenge against those who try to destroy us is to live fully. When that pastor tore my dress, he thought he was breaking me forever. He didn't know that from that humiliation would be born a strength that even I didn't know I had. My dears who have accompanied me this far, I need to ask an important favor. If this story touched your heart, please hit the subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. That way we can continue this chain of support and hope. Share this video with someone you think needs to hear this message. And in the comments, leave the word courage so I know you watched until the end and are with me in this fight. Do this now. Let's break the silence together.